Thanks for checking out Scruffy City Aquatics. I hope you'll consider subscribing to the channel. If at any point you like this video, feel free to click the like. I really appreciate that. Hopefully something said that you feel like you need to comment on, and of course that comment section's below. I wanted to do a video on testing water parameters, but mostly on why I test my aquarium water. I see it a lot online, both on Facebook and in forums, where someone will ask a question, and it's common for people to say, well, what are your water parameters? You just had a fish die. What are your water parameters? You've got a film. What are your water parameters? Your tank's temperature is off. What are your water parameters? I don't know. People ask that question all the time. And then you typically get someone in that chain who says, well, I never test my water. And that's fine. If you're an experienced hobbyist, you absolutely can keep an aquarium without testing your water. I've done it for periods of time. It's worked for me as well. I know it's worked for a lot of people that I know. But for those who aren't an experienced aquarist, it's not a good idea to go down that path yet. It's not until you feel very comfortable with knowing what's going on with your tank. Case in point, I woke up one day and I don't know what it was. I'd had an issue with the 25 and I had just tested the water in the 25 and everything was good. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to test the 75. I haven't done it in a while. And the 75 had a spike of nitrites, like 5 parts per million. I think that's what it was, which is high. I mean, 1 part per million is usually recommended for a water change. So I went ahead and did an emergency water change and treated with some Fritz Complete in order to detoxify anything that was left in the water. It was a surprise. The 75's been running for 3 years now. So to have a nitrite spike is kind of odd. Looking back on it, as I started trying to figure out why did this happen, there's a number of things that I did. And I should have expected some change. I cleaned all of my sponge filters. A couple days before, I cleaned out all of the duckweed in the tank. And in the same week, I got rid of 40 fish out of the tank. And I didn't change my feeding habits. That one's definitely on me. So I had less fish, the same amount of food. I had less floating plants to eat up ammonia. And I'd cleaned my filters, which sometimes can disrupt some of your beneficial bacteria. I don't know if that one was a factor or not, but it happened during the same time, so I'm going to count it. That led to a nitrite spike. It lasted for a few days. I just kept watch on it. I only changed the water that one time extra. And then I did dose Fritz Complete a couple of times when I was around the 1. And as long as it stayed under 1, I really wanted to leave it so that that cycle could keep working and I could get rid of those nitrites and be back at nitrates. Now the nitrates are still low in the tank. I'm actually putting a lot of fertilizer in it right now because the nitrates are nowhere near where I would like for them to be for the amount of plants that are in here. But had I not tested the water, the nitrites could have raised to a level that could have been dangerous for my fish. They already were at a level that was considered dangerous, although I had no losses. So I do think it's important that we test our water. I do think it's important that we have the means of testing our water. It's beneficial. Now I know there are people out there that can raise their lid and smell the water and know when there's ammonia. And I have smelled ammonia in a tank before, so I have an idea of what it's like, but I don't think I've smelled it enough to be able to walk by the tank and know. And also, I know that you can look at your inhabitants and you can kind of see what's going on. There was one time all of my fish were swimming up at the top of the water, and at the time I was running DIY CO2. Well, my valve had dumped CO2 into the tank and was just pushing it into the tank. And so when I looked at my little checker, the little color checker, I don't know what it's called, the glass thing. When I checked that, it was yellow, which means you have a lot of CO2 going on. So I immediately got to work on correcting that. I didn't have to test the water to know that, per se, but I had something in the water to test it and to tell me. So in a sense, I still did. But if you're new to the hobby, you've not experienced these things, you've not seen what they can do to your tank, it's important for you to have an idea of what your water parameters are. Now, do I think you should go through and test every little thing every day? No. I don't think it's important to know your pH every day. Now, if you're starting to do CO2, it is handy to know where your pH is, because your pH will swing with your CO2. So, or not so much swing, but it'll lower. You should be lowering your you should be lowering your pH when you're adding CO2. I'll get that out of my mouth at some point. Most people, when you get in the hobby, and I know when I got in the hobby, everyone said, don't use the test strips. They're expensive, they cost too much, which is true, and they're not accurate, which may or may not have been true. I didn't really test it. I took the conventional wisdom at face value, and I went and bought one of these. Oh, this one doesn't have the it's supposed to have a little card on the front saying what it is, but this one doesn't have that card. Yeah, this is the API Freshwater Master Test Kit, and you can see here where I recorded my home water. And you see that I have 0 ammonia in my water. The pH out of the tap was 7.6 when I recorded this. I feel like it's not that right now. And nitrates were coming out maybe somewhere between 0 and 5 parts per million. So getting some nitrates just from a water change. It's important information to know. I didn't record it anymore after that. I had planned on doing that, but it became unnecessary as I continued in the hobby. But everyone said, you have to have this. This is something that you have to have if you're going to keep fish. It's how you keep fish safely. And I would agree, it is an important tool to have. And we have power. Not that it matters to you, but glad that my power's on. I should get back to work. I'm going to finish my break with you all. So these bottles, they contain the agents required to color your water to be able to test them to a scale in order to know what's going on with your water. You know, the nitrate test is an important one, and honestly, I started just buying the nitrate test by itself. My printer's turning on, that'll be great. I started buying the nitrate test by itself because I think it was like 20 bucks, whereas this whole thing was closer to 30, and I really had stockpiled so much that I was afraid it was going to start going to start expiring, so I didn't want any more. But this is probably the one I would test the most. Both I would, and you probably will. And it is such a pain to test this. And I got to where I just didn't want to do it. And I think that's where most people get in the habit of not testing their water, because it's such a hassle. I mean, so the nitrate test kit, these bottles, and I think it's the number 2, not the number 1. It's been a while since I've done this regularly. But these bottles have the tendency to separate and crystallize. So not only, this is a horrible noise, you're getting that right now in the mic, I'm sure. But not only do you need to mix the solution, but you've got to kind of move that around and get that mixed back in. It recommends just like shaking it really hard. I'd find myself doing this and hitting it like that, banging it on the wall, and just doing that shaking just over and over again for like a minute, and I would time it, and it was ridiculous. And so I do that and test this and keep up with it, and you know, it is what it is. You get a pretty accurate reading with these if you do it right. The pH, I bumped the camera again. The pH is probably the one I use the most now. I still use this, and as you can see, I normally use the high pH. My bottle of regular pH, pretty full. It's not missing much at all. I rarely test it. There have been times that I've been on the bottom scale of this, and I've decided to test it just to see if I'm maybe off the scale and over in the regular pH. It doesn't happen very often. Yeah, this test I use. This test comes in handy for me because the test strips that I prefer, I don't feel like the pH is all that accurate. It's kind of hard to read, for me anyway, the orange color. You know, I grew up in East Tennessee. We have one color of orange in our area, and any other orange just looks odd to me, and I have trouble differentiating. So I don't like the orange used in those test strips, but I love everything else about them. I'm going to talk about them in a moment. So I do use these quite a bit. I do my best not to use the nitrate. Nitrite, again, many full bottles, because the only time you're going to test for nitrates really during a cycle, or if your cycle crashes and you're trying to cycle again. So these bottles full. The ammonia bottles, which I don't have here, empty, pretty much empty. I don't have a lot of solution in them. I don't like to use them anymore though. Don't use them very often. But you know, you use these glass tubes. Now these glass tubes are pretty cool, and in the beginning I was like, oh man, I'm like a scientist now. This is pretty awesome. And then you know, you shake this thing around and realize that it's kind of stupid looking. But these are a pain too, because at one point I had 4 of them that I cleaned, and they rolled right off a paper towel into the floor, shattered. And I had to figure out how to walk around all the glass, because of course I was barefoot. I'm in my house. You don't wear shoes in your house. And I had to clean it up. It was a pain. This kit, very accurate, if you know what you're doing. I'm gonna tell you a story. So this is not ammonia. This is 2 pH bottles, but I'm gonna talk about in my example. So I had a 10-gallon tank, and it was my quarantine tank. It had been running for a very long time. And I bought a Hillstream Loach. It's probably one of the more expensive fish that I bought, and I realize it's just like $15 or somewhere around there. So it's not an expensive fish, but I haven't bought many fish in that price range. I like to keep common fish. Anyway, I really wanted one. I got one, put it in my 10-gallon. I was watching it. It died. So I tested my water. Everything was 0. So I took it to my local fish store. I took it to Aquatic Marine, and they have the API kit, not kit, but the digital test, where they take a sample of your water, run it, and tell you what you have. And it found ammonia in my water. And I told Kenny there at the store, and Isaac, I was like, I don't understand how that's possible. My liquid kit is getting a 0 reading. And so Kenny was talking with me about how I do the test, and he was like, so when you go and you take your dropper and you're getting the drops, do you run it fast? And I was like, no, I run it slow to get uniform drops. And he said, well, there's. He said, there's your problem. You need to do it very quickly in order to get the right amount in your uniform drops. I'd never heard that. It's not in the instructions. So I've been doing it wrong for years. And so I've tested it since, and it's accurate. It's very accurate that you need to use very quick drops in order to get that right. So you could be using this and get false readings just because you don't know what you're doing, even if you've been keeping fish for a very long time. So I did try some test strips. I didn't really like them. I have had them for an emergency, because sometimes you run out of the liquid and you just don't expect to, or you've ordered one that's not come in yet. So I always like to have some put back. But then one of my favorite online stores, Aquarium Co-op, came out with their own ammonia and multi-test strips. Not only do they come out with them, but they're really reasonably priced. You get 100 of the ammonia strips and 200 of the multi-test strips for like, I'm probably wrong, but it's like 15 bucks. I'll put it on the screen to correct myself, but it's not much, especially when you consider 200 tests and 100 tests. Now, is it a better deal than the API test kit? I don't know. I mean, you can buy the test kit online for like 25 bucks or something like that. So, and it's supposed to do like 600 tests or something, but that's the various. I mean, if I were to say this has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, it tests for 6 things. So 206, that's 1,200 tests. I feel like it's a pretty good deal. I decided to try it. I've been happy with them. I did test them to my test kit, and I feel like they were accurate enough. Could there have been some variation? Yes. Do I think it's far enough to be a problem? No, it's not. So the ammonia strip is separate from the multi-strip, and that's with most of these, and it has something to do with the agents that's on the pad, and how they can cross-contaminate and give you a bad reading. So you can't, there's something on this that can't go anywhere near this. So you keep them separate. I'm almost out of these, by the way. I really like these, one, because I swish it in the water for 30 seconds as opposed to shaking a tube for, well, I guess with the ammonia it's not very long, but you still have to wait like 5 minutes on the on the API water, on the liquid kit. But on this, I swish it around 30 seconds and I get an instant reading. And then if you look at that, and I'll put it up on the screen maybe. The color is what's important, not the words. But you see this is 0 and that is a reading. And that's all I need to know. I need to know that there's a reading. And 0.5, it says it's caution. I don't like 0.5. 0.5 gets a water change for me with ammonia. Anything below 0.5, like if it starts to turn a little bit green, I'll leave it. If it is in that 0.5 range, I typically change water. This says this almost blue, man, that's not coming in. This almost blue color is going to be a water change. And then if you get into these blues, you're in trouble. You're probably losing fish. The ammonia test strip, probably not super accurate, but I don't need it to be. I just need it to tell me that when I need to change water. Ammonia is one of those things that can happen, can sneak up on you. You could have a dead fish, you could have some rotting plants, and it could lead to an issue that you're not expecting. Now, do I just randomly test my tank all the time? No, I usually wait until I have something going on and check just to make sure that I don't have an ammonia spike that I need to deal with. But I've probably gone through twice as many multi-tests as I have. I think that's correct. The ammonia. The multi-test strips I love. These things are amazing, and this is why I do test my water. It's so simple. 3 seconds. You take this. I'm going to pull one of these out. The ammonia ones aren't very exciting. There's one little pad on it. But you take one of these, and you put it down in the water, and you swish it around for 3 seconds. That's it. 3 seconds. Super easy. Now, when I pull these out of my water, I do try to turn them sideways to kind of limit the amount of water that runs down across the pads. You can get some false readings that way, and I'm sure that with API and Tetra and all these other brands that I don't use that I've read people have had issues about, I'm sure they're the same way. You probably have some cross-contamination that creates issues. That's probably why strips have been a problem in the hobby for a while. But these are pretty good. Pretty flimsy, pretty small. You could even cut these in half if you're a real big penny pincher, and $16, $17 for 400 strips. That's like, why not? Why not test your water? And that's kind of how I feel about this. This is so easy. Why not test your water? Why not take a look at it? It takes 1 minute for the agent to be ready, and you really do need to look at these at that minute mark. At least I have found that with my water, I do. The nitrate levels are not great. If you see any pink, you're probably, just like, if it's almost white, it's probably around the 10. 25 is fairly pink, and 50, if I'm at 50, I'm going to change my water. And so if it is that pink, I know to change my water. The test strip says the 100, 200 mark is for a water change, and that's not bad information, especially for someone new, because you want some nitrates in your tank, but I feel like prolonged time, 50 is like a max. So I'm going to change that water. Nitrite, same way. White, a little bit pink. If it's pink, you have nitrite. And that's how I was able to tell in this situation that I needed to do a water change. And this does say at 1 part per million, you need to change your water. Hardness, not useful for me, probably useful for you, because on this scale, I am almost a pink. So you're going from this color to a purple, I'm pink. So I'm like over here, way over 300 hard on the GH parts per million. It's just what my water is. It's what I have to deal with. It is what it is. KH, I do pay attention to that. I'm somewhere around 120. I may have been close to the 180, but typically right in here. It's kind of hard for me to tell, and this is the one that I feel like changes the most once you get past that 1 minute mark, and it starts to read really off. So if I needed to know my KH, I probably would try another means to get it. But that's because my water is so high. I don't know that that would be the case for you, but it is for me. And I was talking about the pH earlier, that I still will use the liquid kit for my pH, but I spot check it with this. I mean, if I were to take a test and it came out 6.4, I'm going to pull out the liquid kit and check that. If it were to be an 8.4, I'd probably do the same thing. I really run somewhere around this 7.2 and 8 usually. If you don't know, your pH can swing morning to night. So in the morning, your pH may bottom out, in the 7s, and then by that night you may be up to 8. Or at least that's kind of what I see with my tank, and that's not abnormal. And then the test also does chlorine, so you could test your home water, know whether or not there's chlorine in there. If you're using a something like Fritz Complete or Seachem's Prime, you shouldn't have that going on in your tank, but you might test it, you might check it. Listen, 30 seconds, 63 seconds. Less than 2 minutes, I can have a pretty good idea of where my water's at. I don't know the exact amounts, probably don't know the exact amounts, but I have a good enough idea to know what's going on in here, if I need to make any changes, if I need to do anything differently. With the process being so simple and so quick, why would we not test our water? I think we have to be careful when we're talking, when we're speaking to or giving advice to people who are new in the hobby. Is it possible to keep an aquarium without having to test the water? Yes. Is it a good idea for us to recommend that to new people? No, it's not. They don't have the experience. I don't know that I do have the experience to keep an aquarium without testing my water. I definitely feel better about knowing where my water's at. And I feel that for new people, we're much better off giving them the advice of looking at their water and knowing what it's like. They'll eventually learn what to look for without testing their water, but until then, testing the water is best. And for those of us who have maybe been in the hobby for a while, there's nothing wrong with testing your water. Test it if it makes you feel better. If you don't think you need to, don't do it. It's either way. But for me, I test my water, and this video has been about why. Thank you for checking out the video. I hope you'll subscribe. I hope you'll like this video and maybe even give me a comment. Do you test your water? How do you test your water? What method do you prefer to use? How often do you test your water? Those are all really great questions. Why don't we have that conversation down in the comments? Hope you're enjoying your tanks. Stay scruffy.